The air in the small study at Kensington Palace was thick with the dust of decades. Princess Anne stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her posture one of official duty, as the renovation lead pointed out the discovery. A warped drawer in an old mahogany desk had concealed a hidden compartment, and within it they had found a small, polished wood box engraved with the initials DS. Anne dismissed the team with a quiet word of thanks. When the door clicked shut, the silence in the room changed, becoming charged and expectant. She was alone with the ghost of her former sister-in-law. Kneeling, she opened the main drawer and found the cleverly concealed panel at the back. A gentle press of her fingers, and it swung inward on a tiny hinge. There in the shallow space sat the box. It was lighter than she expected. The gold latch felt cool beneath her thumb. For a heartbeat she hesitated, the weight of history pressing down on her. Then, with a soft click, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay no jewelry. Only a single cream-colored envelope now yellowed with age. It was sealed with black wax bearing the Spencer crest, and her name, just Anne, was written on the front in Diana's looping familiar script. The date was from the summer of 1997. Breaking the brittle seal, she unfolded the heavy paper. The letter began with a characteristic warmth, but the tone quickly shifted. A thread of steel emerged. Diana wrote of feeling watched, of telephones that clicked strangely, of friends who had grown distant. This was not the impulsive woman of the tabloids, but a person conducting a quiet, desperate investigation. She detailed her suspicions about charities and foundations, of large donations that vanished, of trustees, people they both knew, whose explanations had become evasive. "They think I'm just a silly woman chasing photo opportunities," Diana wrote, her penmanship growing sharper. "But I have become the shield, not just the target." The words turned to Diana's sons, her devotion laced with a chilling dread for the world they would inherit if this rottenness was allowed to fester. The final paragraph held a single underlined sentence. The ink faded to brown. "If you find this, Anne, then know I left behind my final insurance policy. Everything is hidden. The key is in a Swiss bank vault." Anne's gaze dropped back into the compartment. There, nestled in the velvet, was a simple silver key. A tiny slip of tissue was wrapped around it, bearing an engraved code, 837L. The hum of the palace around her seemed to fade into silence. This was no longer a relic. It was a summons. Anne placed the letter on the desk and slid the key into her pocket, feeling its cool, solid weight against her hip. The renovation was no longer about modernizing a room. It was about opening a door to the past, and she was the only one who could walk through it. The silver key felt like an ice chip in the velvet depths of Princess Anne's handbag as her car navigated the quiet, cobbled streets of Lausanne. The private bank, when they arrived, was a monument to discretion. Its marble facade was unmarked, its windows discreetly shaded. It was a fortress built not for show, but for silence, a place where the world's most sensitive secrets were stored away from the light. Inside, the air was cool and still, the only sound the soft echo of measured footsteps on polished stone. A senior clerk, his demeanor one of practiced neutrality, examined her credentials and the key itself, recording its serial number with meticulous care. He asked no questions. He simply led her deeper, through a series of secure corridors lined with reinforced doors, each marked with a brass plaque. They stopped before a heavy steel door, its surface unadorned except for the numbers 837L. With a final, respectful nod, the clerk withdrew, leaving her alone in the small, stark vault room. The silence was absolute. Anne's heart thudded a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs as she inserted the key. For a moment it resisted, as if the lock itself were reluctant to give up its secret. Then, with a smooth, well-oiled turn, it clicked. The vault door opened with a low, metallic sigh. Inside, illuminated by a single cool light, lay a single object, a slim, black leather case. No other boxes, no stacks of documents surrounded it. It sat in solitary state, as if it were the only thing of consequence in the entire secure complex. She lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. Placing it on the small metal table, she released the clasps and opened the lid. The contents were meticulously ordered, a testament to a mind that had been methodical under pressure. Several manila envelopes, each labeled in Diana's hand, were stacked neatly. Some contained photographs of people and places Anne vaguely recognized from charity functions. Others held private letters and memos. But the most damning were the financial documents, bank statements, transfer records, and audit reports from charitable foundations and offshore investment groups. The names were a roster of the powerful and the philanthropic individuals still celebrated in London society. As she pieced the documents together, a chilling pattern emerged. Funds donated in Diana's name for hospitals and refugee aid had been systematically diverted through a chain of shell companies and intermediaries. The same handful of names, advisors, trustees, consultants, appeared again and again, their signatures authorizing the movement of millions away from the vulnerable and into opaque accounts. Correspondence showed Diana's growing alarm, her attempts to confront the individuals involved, and the subsequent warnings she received. One unsigned note, dated just weeks before her death, was starkly simple. Stop digging. At the very bottom of the case was a final envelope. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, was a short note in that familiar looping script. If something happens to me, tell them I tried. The rest is here. The truth is heavier than crowns, but lighter than lies. Anne closed the case, the click of the latch echoing in the silent room. She had come seeking a ghost, and she had found a ledger of betrayal. The truth was no longer a theory in a letter. It was a tangible, dangerous weight in her hands. As she left the bank, stepping out into the pale Swiss sunlight, she understood that the vault had not only held Diana's secrets. It had revealed the stark outline of the battle to come. The journey back to London was shrouded in a silence that felt heavier than the Alps they had flown over. The comforting hum of the jet's engines did nothing to quiet the tumult in Anne's mind. The damning evidence was now digitally copied and secured, but the knowledge it contained felt like a live wire inside her, crackling with peril. She arrived at her apartments with the usual quiet efficiency, her face a mask of composure that betrayed nothing. But beneath the calm, her world had been fundamentally shifted. At first, the signs were easy to dismiss as the imaginings of an overtired mind. A file on her desk was not in the exact position she had left it. Her private line, a number known to a select few, had a faint, persistent static she didn't recognize. She attributed it to faulty wiring, a glitch to be reported to the maintenance office. But the unease persisted, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Then, the signs became unmistakable. A dark sedan, nondescript but clean, was parked opposite her residence for 3 consecutive days. The footsteps she heard in the corridor outside her private study would cease the moment she opened the door, revealing an empty hallway. One morning, she found a plain, unmarked envelope that had been slipped under her door. It was empty. The message was not in the content, but in the act itself, a demonstration of access and intent. Her royal training, a lifetime of being observant and measured, snapped into focus. She was not being paranoid. She was being hunted. She reached out to a retired intelligence officer, a man named Alistair Finch, who had once briefed the family on security. Without revealing the specifics of her discovery, she asked him to conduct a discreet sweep of her rooms. What he found confirmed her deepest fears. Her phone lines had been expertly tapped. Tiny, sophisticated transmitters, no larger than a coin, had been placed in her study and sitting room. Her sanctuary had been violated. The final chilling confirmation came a week later. Another plain envelope, same method. This time it contained a single card. No crest, no handwriting, just 4 words typed in a neutral font. Stop digging or join her. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a direct echo of the warnings Diana had described in her letter. The shadows of the past were not just a memory. They were a present and active force. That night, Anne laid the contents of the Swiss case out once more. She saw the network not as a historical artifact, but as a living, breathing organism, one that had sensed her intrusion and was now pushing back. The same foundations under new names were still operating. The money was still moving. She understood then that she could not fight this from within the gilded cage of the palace. Every institution was potentially compromised. With a resolve as cold and hard as the silver key, she made a decision. She packed a single small case with essentials and a set of unassuming clothes. As the first gray light of dawn touched the London skyline, her car pulled away from the palace gates, its destination known to no one. She was no longer just an investigator. She was now a player in the same dangerous game that had claimed Diana, and the rules were being written in the shadows. The chapel stood in a fold of the countryside, a place forgotten by time and progress. Ivy choked its stone walls, and the ancient yew in the graveyard cast a long, skeletal shadow in the weak afternoon light. Anne had driven for hours, following the instructions from the unmarked note, her senses on high alert. This was the appointed place. She pushed open the heavy oak door, its groan echoing in the cavernous, empty space. The air inside was cold and smelled of damp stone and old incense. She did not have to wait long. From the shadows of a side chapel, a figure emerged. He moved with a careful, weary grace, and it took Anne a moment to place him. Timothy Radcliffe, Diana's private secretary during her most turbulent years. He had vanished from public life after her death, his departure explained away as an early retirement due to stress. Time had not been kind to him. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed by a knowledge that seemed to have hollowed him from within. "I wondered if it would be you who came," he said, his voice a dry rustle in the quiet. "She spoke of you, you know. Not often, but with a certain respect. She said you were the only one who didn't pretend." Anne said nothing, simply waited. He began to speak, not as a storyteller, but as a man unburdening his soul. He confirmed the existence of the Circle, a small, terrified group of aides and confidants who had helped Diana gather her evidence. They had been her eyes and ears, her clandestine couriers. "We knew it was dangerous," Radcliffe whispered, his gaze fixed on the dusty altar. "We thought we could protect her. We were fools. When Diana died, the Circle shattered. Some, like him, fled into obscurity. Others met with untimely ends, a sudden illness, a car accident on a clear night, a tragic slip on a hiking path. Coincidences, all of them. The official investigation, he revealed, had been a masterclass in obfuscation. Key witnesses were discouraged from speaking. Evidence was mislaid before it could be properly examined, and the final report was a masterpiece of implication and omission, designed to lead the public toward a conclusion of tragic chaos, not calculated murder. "The system has 2 faces. Your Royal Highness," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "The one you see, the pomp and ceremony, the duty, and the invisible one, the one that operates in boardrooms and late-night calls, the one that makes problems disappear." Diana had stumbled into the invisible world, and she had to be removed for the comfort of the visible one. From his coat pocket, he drew a small, wax-sealed object and pressed it into her hand. It was a flash drive. "This is the rest of it," he said. "The final recordings. The financial trails that lead to doors no journalist would dare knock on. She was going to release it. They knew. Guard it with your life." As he melted back into the shadows from whence he came, Anne stood alone in the fading light, the cold weight of the drive in her palm. The last piece of the puzzle was now in her possession. The conspiracy was not a ghost. It was a living, breathing entity, and she was now holding its heart in her hand. The truth was no longer something to be uncovered, but a weapon to be wielded, and she knew the hand that held it would never be safe again. Princess Anne sat in the deep quiet of her study, the same room where this journey had begun with the whisper of a lifting latch. The storm was now contained, sealed within a plain brown box on the desk before her. It looked innocuous, like something meant for storage. Yet she knew its contents held the power to shatter the foundations of the monarchy, topple governments, and rewrite the history of the last 3 decades in a torrent of scandal and blood. For days, she had wrestled with the choice. The righteous. Fury she had felt in the Swiss vault, the cold dread in the forgotten chapel. They clamored for release. To expose it all, to let the truth fall like a hammer upon the guilty, was the justice Diana had sought. It was what Anne, in her heart of hearts, believed they deserved. But then she thought of the aftermath. Not for the powerful men whose names were in those files, but for the innocent. She thought of William and Harry, the sons who had already lost their mother to this darkness. To unleash this storm would be to plunge them into a maelstrom from which there would be no escape. Their lives, their roles, the institution they were born to steward would be irrevocably scarred, perhaps destroyed, in the ensuing firestorm. The public's faith, once broken, might never be repaired. Her duty was not just to truth, but to the future. Her silence, she decided, would not be a surrender. It would be a strategic, deliberate act of custody. She had become the guardian of a devastating secret, not its gravedigger. In the days that followed, she worked with a quiet, grim resolve. Copies of the evidence were secured in safe deposit boxes in Zurich, New York, and Singapore, entrusted to lawyers who knew only a fraction of the story. The instructions were clear, the triggers for release complex and tied to her own safety. Finally, she wrote her own account. It was a plain, factual narrative, devoid of emotion, detailing every name, date, and transaction. She sealed it in an envelope and placed it with her most trusted solicitor, with instructions that it was to be opened only upon her death. It was her final insurance policy, ensuring that if the shadows she now walked in ever claimed her, the truth would not die with her. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the palace grounds. The weight of the secret was now a part of her, a cold, hard stone she would carry for the rest of her life. She had chosen stability over chaos, protection over vengeance. She had chosen to let the world continue in its comfortable ignorance, for now. But the truth was no longer lost. It was preserved, waiting in the wings of history. One day, when the world was ready, when the innocent were safe, it would find its moment. And on that day, the patient custodian would finally let the storm break.